All right, so today's panel discussion is about fostering health innovations in Africa. And it's a discussion which is reaching perspective from different workspaces. We have Just One Giant Lab being involved. We have the Africa Oxford Initiative. And we also have Yamachi Biotechnology, as well as the West African Center for Cell Biology of Infectious Pathogens. These are 4 organizations that are highly involved as far as health in Africa is concerned. And the main objectives of today's chat is simply to explore the different factors that affect health and well-being across the continent, and at the same time to be able to look at how to solve some of these health challenges, specifically looking at some of the more cutting-edge solutions that we can use to address health issues. Of particular importance is the role of partnerships, because no one organization can do it by itself. And finally, since many of you are highly interested in being problem solvers and being innovators, what kinds of opportunities are available to health innovators in Africa? Like I stated earlier, we will benefit from the insights of 3 experts. We have Dr. Yao Bediako from West Africa Center of Cell Biology of Infectious Pathogens, as well as Yamachi Biotech, which is an exciting a new initiative looking at research in cancer. We have Thomas Landren, who is the CEO of Just One Giant Lab, and we have Dr. Watu Wamai from the Oxford Africa Initiative. So before we start the discussions, I'll give the opportunity for each of our panelists to introduce themselves and also the initiatives that they are involved in much more. So over to you, Yao.
Okay, so hello everybody. As Meli said, my name is Yao Bediako. I'm Ghanaian. I'm based in Accra. And I'm, I guess, wearing 2 hats today. One is as the founder and CEO of Yamachi Biotechnology, which is a very young biotech startup that I've co-founded in Accra. And our focus is cancer research among African populations. So leveraging the unique genetic attributes of the African population to help us understand more about cancer. And then I'm also a research fellow at the West African Center for Cell Biology of Infectious Pathogens, WACBIP, which is a center within the University of Ghana. And WACBIP is a postgraduate training center focusing on molecular and cellular biology, particularly related to infectious diseases, but now increasingly also including non-communicable disease. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Thomas.
Hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. And so I'm the co-founder and CEO of Just One Giant Lab, which is a young NGO based in Paris, but who has a global reach. Our goal is to make community-driven innovation and research possible and scalable. So we have developed a digital platform that is free and open source so that communities around the world can come together and contribute on open science projects. And we also animate thematics, open science thematics, where we provide tools to the community and that they can develop those projects and be supported. And so we do that through open peer reviewing and also through microgrants. We are also just starting developing our activities in Africa under the supervision of Gameli. And so I'm looking very much forward to hearing and learning more about what you all do.
Thank you, Thomas. We'll segue smoothly to Watu.
Thank you, Gameli. I'm very delighted to be here, and thanks for inviting me to participate in your panel. And yes, my name is Watu Wamai, and I work for the Africa Oxford Initiative, which is based at the University of Oxford. And it's a platform that facilitates it's a cross-university platform, and it facilitates equitable and sustainable collaborations between researchers based in African institutions, so across the entire continent, and researchers based at the University of Oxford. And it's been I've been running for about 4 years now, and over that period of time, we facilitated a few hundred collaborations with Africa in Oxford. And the other thing that is important to point out is that we cover all disciplines, not just health. So from astrophysics all the way to, you know, zoology, music, anything you might think of that is taught at the university level. And what we really do beyond facilitating research outputs such as academic publications is that our support looks to enable a wide range of innovations in medical sciences, obviously, but also in other areas such as big data engineering, astrophysics, and environmental conservation, and also in humanities and, you know, social sciences and so on. And what we are now doing within AFOX is working very closely on innovation. So we have launched what is now called the Africa Oxford Health Innovation Platform, and it's looking to very much focus on innovation and entrepreneurship in Africa.
Okay, thank you very much. I like that you close on the Africa Health Innovation Platform. I mean, one would wonder, why is a conversation on health innovation important?
So it's definitely a very topical area. And, you know, the first thing that I must say very importantly is that, as we all know, there's a huge explosion of talent on the African continent, and this is a positive sign. And it's created many opportunities for people to come up with new ways to fix existing challenges in health, but then also challenges that may be emerging. And we know that we need new approaches to tackle disease prevention, early diagnosis, treatment, you name it, and also very much to strengthen health systems across Africa. So, I mean, just to sort of give a broad sense, is that there's a massive opportunity, and of course there are challenges that need to be met.
Okay, thank you very much. There are opportunities, and then there are also challenges. From your experience living in Ghana and also working as a health researcher, what would you say are some of the key challenges when it comes to the health sector in Ghana?
Well, thank you, Gameli. I mean, I'm not a clinician, so I'll limit my, when you talk about the health sector, you're typically talking about healthcare provision, which I'm not an expert on. But where I sit is more sort of health research. I'll say from the perspective of health research in Africa, the biggest challenge is resources, is capital, it's money. I mean, it honestly boils down to money. As Watu said, I actually don't consider it an explosion of talent. The talent has always been there. It's just that we're now maybe realizing it, or we're now pointing it out. Africa doesn't lack for talent, it doesn't lack for ideas. What we lack for is resources. And unfortunately, or, biomedical research is extremely expensive. There are certain areas of research that you can get by with, a few $1,000s and a little bit of grit. A few $1,000s doesn't go very far in a biomedical research lab. And so with research, which I believe is fundamental if we are to solve problems that face our own problems, our own health problems, it's going to take homegrown, home-driven research, but that costs a lot of money. So I think there are now who are trying to make, chart paths in the research arena. But the biggest challenge they face is access to resources, access to infrastructure. A lot of grants will fund a project, but they won't really fund the infrastructure you need. They basically, that's your host institution's responsibility. Well, if my host institution doesn't have the money or the will to purchase that piece of equipment, then, the grant you're giving me doesn't really help me. So I think the biggest challenge, to be perfectly honest, I think it boils down to resources, whether it's infrastructure or capacity, whether it is just capital to buy reagents and buy supplies. And I think all of that lack of resources feeds into a lack of a supportive ecosystem. So you find that you may be the only one in your institution that has expertise in an area where you are working, and that makes it difficult to cross-pollinate and to move forward. I think that is part of the reason why initiatives like AFOX exist to try to provide African researchers with opportunities to interact with people who are in their fields when they may not get that exposure to people back home. So, I mean, I think, yeah, long story short, I think the biggest challenge I see is access to resource, which then would allow us to unlock the talent that is here and allow people to really move forward with their innovations.
Wow, that's interesting that you identify access to resources and infrastructure as one of the key challenges bedeviling health. And when you think about it that way, it's also almost scary, as if the problems are, unsurmountable. Thomas, but it looks as if JOGL, as an organization, as a platform, is more or less like innovating a way to completely turn around what is required to innovate as far as health is concerned, especially within the context of the Open COVID-19 initiative. What would you say are some of the key elements that will be needed to be able to address some of these challenges with health and research, in context like having challenges with infrastructure?
Thank you, Gameli. I completely agree with just what has just been said. But I would say that there is not only a lack of resources. Sometimes there is a lack of capability of taking the initiative. Like you want to be able to do something, but sometimes you're not either in the right position because you lack resources, but sometimes you just don't have the rights to act, or you don't know how to find the path to be able to contribute to a project. And as you said, it's not the question of resources. Talents. I mean, it's how do you access resources? And so it's really a matter of how do we create a system where resources are able to navigate and more dynamically. How do we create more interfaces between actors who have resources and actors who actually need those resources? So there is there is not a good equilibrium, and so we need to create basically flows between those two levels. And so the way JOGL acts on this is by inviting people who have not only personal resources but also skills, so that they can provide their time in creating something that can solve a problem. But that's one part of the equation, right? Is how do you create a good team of people, making people meet around a specific problem, and not necessarily within the same space, physical space, but beyond frontiers. That's what we've seen with Open COVID-19, is that some of the best projects were made by people who never met before, were not in the same professional space, but they had complementary skills, and so they matched, and at the end they could create some amazing projects. For example, diagnosis tests that were extremely low cost, very performant, and we had people coming from the startup world, people coming from the medical world in hospitals, people coming from community laboratories, fab labs, etc., etc. So it was very fascinating to see, and then. There is also a barrier as a lot of projects are just sometimes too small, or don't have necessarily the right access to ask for resources. And so, how do you do when you are just starting, you have an idea, and that you want to test that idea? You're not going to create a whole startup or a whole academic laboratory to start working on this. It just takes too much time. If you are yourself in the position of being a researcher, well, good for you, and you should follow that path. But that doesn't concern everyone. So the idea is, how do we also empower people who are more like entrepreneurs, and so, but not necessarily in the typical meaning of that word, meaning that you don't have to create a company every time, you just want to make change happen. And so how do we provide a platform for those new kind of, let's say, open science entrepreneurs that wants to create solutions, working with researchers, working with society, but they cannot talk to the big foundations. They cannot institutions because they are not being recognized. There is no doors for them basically to knock on. So that's where JOGL, intervene. We work with those big foundations and institutions, and when we receive some of their resources, and we provide a way for all those smaller projects to get access to it through a process that is peer-reviewed and that is based, on the validation by the community also. So that has helped for the Open COVID-19 initiative. Dozens of projects. We mobilized during 2020 more than 4,000 people from all over the world. Out of them, I would say about 120 projects were born, and 33 of them were funded by our microgrant system. And the way it works is very interesting because we, it's a small amount of money. It's a few thousand euros, usually about between 1,000 and 5,000 euros. And if a project is selected, is evaluated correctly by the community, it gets funded. And if the project has good success, has good results, it can ask the funding again. So it's a very agile process where we reduce the risk also of addressing many original ideas. If a project fails, that's okay. It's being openly documented, and we know why it fails, and the amount of money that was used is not very high. But if projects succeed, then it can ask again as the project advance, and to a point where the proof of concept of that project is strong enough so that it becomes strong enough to go and ask itself money to those big foundations and institutions. So it's an interesting path that we've seen. And one of the examples is some of the diagnosis tests that we supported during 2020. Some of them are now doing partnership with companies to be potentially commercialized, and those are open source diagnosis tests which are extremely cheap. And some of them also were in the semi-final of the X Prize. One of them is even in the final of the X Prize, which is this huge innovation competition where you normally find big startups in laboratories. So just to show you that having a community-driven approach to science and innovation actually work and is successful and can compete with the usual approaches where you are either in an institution or you're an equity-based organization.
Wow, that's very interesting. So we are just looking at innovation from the open science perspective, having this global platform where we can have different contributors. I'm going to come back to you, Yao, from the point of view of a single organization like Yamachi and what you're trying to do. What would you say are some of the key opportunities that you're exploring in your space, and what are some of the issues within that context that are very important to be addressed?
Okay, so I guess maybe for a little bit of context, the reason I founded Yamachi was my response to this lack of resources, my response to feeling almost trapped in a funding cycle. As an academic researcher, you go from grant to grant. Now that is stressful anywhere in the world, but it's particularly stressful in Africa because there are fewer grants. We are training more and more people so that those grants, and all our grants, almost all, are from overseas, from outside the continent. A great example of what happens is what will happen today when UKRI announced that they are pretty much going to cut nearly every aid-funded grant program as of July 31st because the UK government has slashed their budget. So people are currently to hear back for fellowships that they've applied for that are funded by GCRF or UKRI money. Most likely those, based on this letter, it sounds like those grants, those fellowships are not going to be awarded. And even people with current grants are going to be potentially terminated based on this letter. They said from July 31st, there may be termination of those grants. That is just one example of the pain that, being an African researcher who is dependent on overseas grants, this is what can happen. Not only you apply for the grants based on an agenda that is not necessarily set for you, it's set for you, it's not set by you. But then when times get hard, like you have an unprecedented pandemic and overseas governments decide to slash their budgets, guess where they will slash first? And you can't necessarily blame them. It is their public money. And if they've decided that overseas development aid is where they're going to slash, it's their prerogative. So my response, so Yamachi is my response to what I see as an unsustainable research system. It is completely dependent on overseas grants. It is purely academic. And in my opinion, whilst we grow the academic research base in Africa, we have to begin to grow the private, commercial, private enterprise, sort of viewing science as a business. America and Europe do that to great effect. Biotech, East Coast, West Coast of the US is full of biotech companies. Europe has growing biotech industry. Science is not viewed as purely academic enterprise. And I think the stumbling block we have in Africa is too often when we think of science, we think of it as an academic exercise. And so when even young people have ideas, they seem to, if you're good at science, but you want to do a business, those two don't go together. So then they switch and they go do something else. They don't take their scientific ideas forward because they don't see a path to making a profitable business from the perspective of science. But some of the most valuable companies in the US and Europe are scientific companies. So the idea that as a scientist you cannot be, or as a scientist you cannot also be an entrepreneur is something that we need to change. And so Yamachi is one example. My vision for Yamachi is to be a first-class research institute or research company. But we aim to be private. And what we are trying to do is tap into alternate sources of funding. So yes, we will apply for grants if they are available. But the idea is to raise money the way a startup does, which is looking for investment. But we're not raising the investment to build real estate or to open a factory or to even do agribusiness. We are raising investment to do research that ultimately will have hopefully commercial benefit, but it's fundamental research, stuff that you see in academic labs. And I think that is my response to basically saying, if I keep depending on grants, I'm always going to have this pressure. Now, it doesn't mean a startup is incredibly stressful as well. I'll probably go completely gray by the end. But in my view, we need to explore all avenues of support. And hopefully, yes, you will attract overseas support, but hopefully you begin to attract local investment. Local business people begin to see the value of investing in science and innovation. And so you begin to open up those avenues. People who ordinarily would not see a path to giving money to a university may see a path to investing in a research company, a private research company that is doing research. So I think, so that is sort of the opportunity that I believe exists. I think there's an opportunity to attract significant overseas into our innovation and our healthcare infrastructure if we create the vehicles whereby these people can see a good commercial reason to invest. There's a lot of push for overseas investment, but it's always lately it's in agriculture and manufacturing. It's not in science. And I believe science is a great investment as well. And I'll end with this. In my opinion, when someone invests in your business, the dynamic is one of an asset, an investor investing in an asset because they see that you are potentially commercially viable, you're a good bet. Now it's venture capital, so there's such an amount of risk and all of that, but they're investing in you because they think you have certain intangibles, you have certain characteristics, your business has certain characteristics that are exciting to them and are potentially going to have A, impact if they are impact-minded investors, but B, they are still investors, so it's about return. A grant is purely philanthropic. A grant is, yeah, we think you're a good scientist, you're doing good work, you're helping people, it's impact, but it's philanthropy. And so the dynamic is always of the haves and the have-nots. Investment, in my opinion, changes that dynamic a bit. So I think we need to maintain academic research. It is the engine that drives innovation, and we need to invest in it, and we need our governments to invest in it, and we need to try to grow that sector. But I believe at the same time, in parallel, we need to find ways to grow the private innovation, private enterprise arm of science, whether it is fundamental research, like what I hope to do, or more translational aspects. We need to find ways to raise money to run these things almost separately from the academic research enterprises that we have, but then find ways to then create that unified ecosystem where you can have people coming out of universities and coming into these startups. And so you basically create a home for all the people you're training. Because right now, we're fighting brain drain only from one end. We're training more and more people, but where are all these PhDs and master's students going to work? They can't all come back to university. And so we're basically we're actually creating a more expensive brain drain. If they leave after high school, well, America or Europe trains them and then they stay there. If they leave after a PhD in Ghana, guess what? We've invested in them so much and then we lose them at the end of the value chain. That is more damaging. So I think our current, perhaps overemphasis on training without thinking about the end of the pathway, which is where they end up, and not creating opportunities for young, talented scientists and people, with great ideas to actually go and have the resources to develop these ideas. If we don't do that, they end up in startups in America or in Europe. And then we've achieved, in my opinion, nothing. So I don't know if this quite answers your question, but I think it's about tapping in alternative sources, alternative ways of thinking about research that can complement the traditional academic model of what I grew up in, which is, scientific research.
Yeah, I mean, your answer absolutely addresses my question. I mean, it's the same kind of challenge and need that we are trying to also address at JOGL. And my next question goes to Watu. And my question simply is, how do you respond to some of the issues that Yao has raised? What kinds of interventions do you think need to be supported, and how do they need to be deployed in order to really solve the health challenges we're talking about?
Yeah, thank you for that. And before I answer your question, I'd just like to take a step back and come back to something that Thomas mentioned, which I think is very important, and sort of elaborate on it a little bit. So he brought out the question of being connected, connecting people. This is very important because new ideas come from people. That, infrastructure matters and all the rest of it, but that exchange of ideas, that knowledge exchange, sort of bidirectional, and those feedback loops. And we've seen this in global trends as well. So we see even in companies that work very well, they have, alliances, corporate alliances, and these corporate alliances are there to recognize the need for knowledge exchange. And it's they're very much seen as, a locus for innovation. So if you really have sort of gaps in the knowledge that you're working with in your company or industry, you will want to collaborate and share knowledge and think together, bring minds together to then crack the problem. So the work around removing pinch points by allowing easier flow of knowledge, and so that people can, exchange and benefit and build on what exists, is very important, because a lot of the innovations we come up with are actually about reconfiguring knowledge that already exists. So you look at a problem, you try and identify what the best solution would be for that particular context, because contexts vary. And then you look at the disparate sources of knowledge and how you can connect or tap into them. And it's therefore very important also to highlight the importance of global trends. And in the case of Africa, we know that there's a demographic. And the explosion of talent I was referring to is very much to do with that. We have very many more people, and we have other mega trends, such as technological trends in all sorts of different areas, be it AI, but then there are also many other areas such as synthetic biology that Thomas probably knows much more about, and all this knowledge that is coming up that can be applied to different areas. And we also know that there are other economic shifts that are massive. So for example, the center of gravity has shifted to China, or is busy shifting there. And we've seen that this is creating all sorts of political tensions and changes across the world, and so on and so forth. So we don't operate in an island. We're not in isolation in Africa and sort of locked into our problems. And of course, a very poignant case is, when you have pandemics, they sort of, they're global. When you have issues to do with climate change, they're global. And now just sort of moving on into what are we doing at AFOX. So as I mentioned at the beginning, AFOX is a facilitator. It's very much a knowledge broker. So this is what it is trying to do. It is trying to connect people, and by so doing, link up different sources of knowledge. you may be well aware that there are all sorts of, basic science research elements that are happening across the University of Oxford in very many different areas. And that creates a huge potential, for example, to come up with solutions with startups, new businesses, with new ways of doing things, and so on and so forth. So what AFOX does by connecting Africa to Oxford is helping those connections to happen. And with the Health Innovation Platform, what we're really doing is the Africans are coming with their own solutions because they know their context very well. They know what would work there. What works there is not necessarily what would work in Paris or London or anywhere else. So they're coming up with solutions that are context specific. But some of the elements that are needed to actually take that idea, transform it into an innovation, and then commercialize it, are basic principles that are universal. So if it's about basic principles of engineering or what that might be in whatever area that you're innovating in, or to do with lateral flow devices, or be thinking of, you need access to those basic principles, and you don't have all the knowledge yourself. And in some instances, you don't have access to the facilities that Yao was talking about, and having that possibility of also sharing resources to build on that sort of, those basic foundations is very important. And then of course, just the exchange of ideas, even if you're thinking a little bit downstream in terms of the entrepreneurship side. So moving on from sort of applied research and translational research to thinking much more about commercialization, having that sort of understanding the dynamics of what's going on around the world and getting new ideas, and also being able to tap into funding in the way that Yao, very well explained, is one of the things that we are thinking of. So at AFOX with the innovation platform, it's very much about connectivity in the first instance, and then providing a basis to build on basic skills, but then very much exchange ideas, because people are coming with ideas, they're not coming there blank. And they have, great ideas, and it's building on those ideas that really matters. It's creating that sort of space to really be able to engage in the same way that Toma was describing what they do. So that's really where we are looking at. And this is not a move away from what we've been previously doing, which has been very much promoting basic science research and other areas of research. And for researchers who are in an academic career and they go on and publish and so on, it's beginning to think, how can we make the most out of those research outputs and turn them into outcomes, turn them into things that make a tangible change on the ground. Not that publications don't matter, but for the most part, the real reason why you're engaging in science, beyond sort of blue sky science,
policy level. We are indeed also talking about what happens in scientific labs, etc. Where do you think we should put most of our attention as far as health innovation is concerned? So I'll start with you, Watson.
Okay, fair enough. I would be slightly reluctant to sort of pick, because the solutions to these big challenges are multi-pronged. So what Yao was very clearly describing is the importance of having joined up systems. So by that, we are saying that obviously it's very much about connecting research to industry. And if you're going to connect research to industry, industry is only going to engage with research if you have solid research that can then be applied and help businesses, because businesses are there obviously to have a return on investment and so on and so forth. So it's about creating joined up systems. And if you think about what is popularly known as the triple helix, so you're thinking on the one hand you have universities, on the other hand you have industries, and then you have a third arm that's talking about government, because government has a role. And for me, the government role is not just purely regulation and coming up with policies and saying, you know, probably giving a bit of funding here and there. The government in itself is very entrepreneurial, it's very innovative, and of course, it is the government in very many contexts that invests in basic science. It's not the companies. If you're going to do blue skies research, you know, to let's say to do with I don't know, space science, etc., and you know, moonshots and all those sorts of things, this money normally comes from the government. And so the government has a lot of contribution to make in terms of that entrepreneurial end. In the African context, the connections between the different elements within a country all need a huge amount of work. You know, as I mentioned earlier, for businesses to want to engage with, let's say, the University of Ghana, they have to see something that they can then take back to their, you know, to industry, and then, you know, generate revenue and generate profit. And they have to have those connections and channels. And it's not even just seeing the thing that they might be able to get from there. Within industry, you have to have people who understand the science. So the capacity, the expertise has to be there, who are able to then tap into that knowledge, you know, turn it into something usable within the processes of, you know, production and so on and so forth. So there are very many areas where we need to be thinking about. It's not just emphasizing on one area and hoping that the others are simply going to follow, is my take on this.
Yeah, I agree with your answer in principle, but I'll still push back and open it up for discussion a little bit, in the sense that I think that here, if you apply the context, you would probably see that perhaps we are already doing slightly better in one of the areas than others. So not to say we should put all our attention on one side, and not to say that they shouldn't work together, but just as a way of trying to unpick the problem areas that innovators can potentially, you know, address. But I'll still maybe hand it over to Yao if he has another way of looking at it.
Could you just clarify your question a little? Are you talking specifically?
I was asking that if you, looking at our context, I mean, if you are talking of health, like you said before, you are more coming from the research side, whilst there's also the health facility side. There's also the larger community or society side. There's also the policy side. And I was just wondering, like, looking at our context, let's say in Ghana, where should we be, you know, where should we be focused on improving, so to speak?
I mean, I think in this case, I think I would agree with Watu. It's difficult to pick. I mean, I wasn't sure if you meant, you know, which components of, you know, should we look at, or is it in specific sort of, I guess, thematic areas? I mean, what I'm getting from you sort of within the health system is that there are different areas that we should focus on in terms of development. I think, you know, it's a system, and if one is weak, one part is weak, everything else it breaks down. So I think we have to fight. One thing I would say is we have to fight against the urge to always go for the lowest hanging fruit. I feel that unfortunately, in an era of cost effectiveness, driving a lot of the decisions that in global health, we often go for low hanging fruit all the time. It's like, well, go for the biggest bang for your buck and the most straightforward. And so we tend to focus on community-based public health campaigns, and don't get me wrong, those are important. But, you know, sometimes I look at the projects that get funded for Africa, and there are projects that would never get funded in Europe because they're not sophisticated enough. I mean, I've actually sat in a room where somebody from Europe was listening. It was in Africa. It was a meeting in Africa, and they were talking about different projects. And somebody from, you know, who didn't know I was listening, from Europe, was sitting next to me, passed the comment that this would never get passed in Europe because it didn't have enough sort of innovation. Like it was very bare bones, very, very low hanging fruit. It wasn't ambitious enough. And I think it's not so much about where we focus. Wherever we are focusing, whether you're looking at healthcare delivery, or you're looking at research, or you're looking at industry or government, we need to begin to start trying to push the boundaries, begin to do more than just the minimum. We need to begin to think, how can we act? What is the root cause of the problem and how do we solve it? So we need to start doing the difficult tasks. It's, you know, we tend, you know, I think we need to stop simply picking what would give the most immediate results and be able to make a big splash and say we've helped 1 million people. Have you really helped those 1 million people, or does it just look like you've helped 1 million people because you kind of scratched the surface, made a bit of noise, but the real systemic problem, the real issue that needs to be dealt with to eradicate whatever issue you're facing has not even been touched. So I think for me, the need is now we need to move away from purely cost effectiveness and begin to look at long-term impact and find ways to ascribe value to that. So when you argue with whoever controls the purse strings, you can say that, yes, it's a lot of money to put into one piece of infrastructure or one innovation, but in 5 years, this is completely going to radicalize how we do things, and it's going to affect all these people. Right now, we could go out and try to give band-aids to everybody, but that is short-term wins, not long-term success. So I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but I think we need to begin to become a bit more ambitious. I throw around a phrase that I learned from one of sort of my public health. It's Paul Farmer, who's based out of Harvard, and he talks about overcoming the failures of our imagination. And to me, that is what drives everything I try to do now. It is not just not doing the bare minimum and not necessarily doing what is low hanging, but going for the fruit at the top of the tree that ultimately holds the key to solving all the problems beneath it. It is harder. It's harder to justify to a funder perhaps, but it's ultimately what's going to really achieve real change. And I think we need to start striving to do that, as opposed to always starting, always just picking what we can easily pick off. I think that ultimately can be damaging in the long run.
Thank you very much. And I certainly also agree with Watu's previous point, which is that if you don't take care of all the different sides, you think you're addressing one side, but you end up, the weakest link can certainly lead to a total system collapse. And just to come back again to Watu and then also to Yao, where you're talking about some of the thematic areas that you think we should focus on. Which areas do you think should be the priority areas for health innovation in Africa?
Well, you're trying to pin us down. I think I would push back against you again and try to and dodge your question and say, I think for me the issue is putting the innovation in the health. Okay, we need to start innovating. We need to start encouraging. I work. WAGBIP is a training institution. We teach our students to be really good molecular biologists, but do we teach them to be innovators, right? Too often I see the people who are taught to be innovators typically are not people doing, immunology or molecular biology. They are, typically we view innovation as something for the people who build apps, so software engineers. That's what innovation is. When you ask, students off the street, when they say the word innovation, they think of something like a mobile app. They don't think of vaccines. They don't think of a new treatment for cancer. They think technology. Now, that shows that we are not putting enough innovation into our basic research. We're not showing them that the guys who built, the guys who developed the COVID-19 vaccine, the couple who did the Pfizer vaccine in Germany or Oxford University, that was incredible innovation. And it took people with computer skills, it took people with immunology, it took people with molecular biology. All of that came together to innovate, to get us a vaccine in the shortest time ever done before. That is innovation. So we need to redefine innovation, maybe for ourselves and certainly for our students, because too often, I know this for a fact, too often students in basic science don't think of themselves as innovators and don't see themselves wanting to innovate. And people who are innovators they don't even think about science, right? And we need to bring those two together. We need to start having workshops. When we talk about innovation workshops, it should include people it should include doctors. It should include, clinicians. It should include basic scientists. It should include software developers and designers, and different types of people should realize that innovation can mean many different things. You can innovate. I think what you're talking about with the with just one global lab is innovation, right? Finding ways to share resources. innovation can mean many different things. So I think in healthcare in Africa, we need to start innovating more. But it's not just about coming up with an e-health app. You know, when we think innovation in health, it's always some app. It's always e-health. Not bashing those, but we're doing that. If we want to go to the next level, innovation in health is coming up with a company to make monoclonal antibodies against whatever, you know, afflicts us, or developing the next, you know, I don't know, making our own reagents so we don't have to import them. That's all innovation. You know, it can be interpreted for different people. So I would say what we need to do is find ways to integrate better our training programs in the sciences with innovation entrepreneurial courses that we do reasonably well in some of our more innovation or enterprise sort of universities, but they don't come together. We need to start bringing them together so that our students begin to realize that they can do both. You can be an immunologist. I mean, I never took a course. I'm learning it on the streets. I wish, you know, when I was younger, I'm not that old, but I wish earlier on in my training, I had taken an entrepreneurship class. It would really help me right now as I'm trying to build Yamachi. So maybe that is something we could do. We can innovate in our educational space to bring in entrepreneurship and basic research together for students to realize they actually could do both effectively.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, we are getting lots of comments also from the participants. One person here says that access to healthcare is a primary problem worldwide. Either it is limited because of high costs and lack of insurance, for example, in the US, or lack of infrastructure, for example, in Africa. Before I ask my next question, Thomas raised his hand, so I'll give him the opportunity.
Yeah, I just wanted to join Watu and Yao in their comments about having a systemic view on the problem, and that everything is linked. And when you look at a system, one of the most important aspects of it is its resilience level. And what makes a system resilient is the number of links between the nodes. And so that provides the importance of being able to create more of those paths between the different actors, different regions, you know, the different worlds. And we're talking about, Yao was speaking of the fact that basic science, innovation, were, you know, not talking efficiently together. That's another point. And it's a global problem. You know, I made my early career in France in research first, and becoming an entrepreneur was something of a very foreign enterprise to me. As a scientist, you're never trained about doing, you know, innovation or entrepreneurship. I see things changing now. As students are getting more, you know, customized to the concept of innovation, as the startup world, startup concept, you know, is becoming more and more of a normal thing. Of past that people can consider, with many examples and many stories that they can get inspired by. But we're just at the beginning, right? And so usually it happens when the students take the initiative in learning about that. We need actually this kind of information to be brought to them, and we also need to provide them with more opportunities to be at the initiative of ideas, and so that they don't have to only follow courses. They can, you know, join projects. They can train by doing innovative ideas. It's as you train doing research in laboratories with researchers, you need to train also yourself on, you know, thinking as an entrepreneur sometimes. And so the opportunities to do that are too rare, especially for the youth. And so and especially for the youth who have been trained in the scientific methodology. So bringing those different worlds together is really important, and that's actually one of the missions that we are also having at JOGL, as we expect the project that are being done on JOGL to be you know, able to receive the help from students, but also students being able to create projects and be you know, supported by the community and JOGL itself. So we're just at the beginning of a huge transition. You know, it's like the innovation world has been transformed with the capital-based, you know, startup where you can get an innovative idea being funded. You can spend years and years without selling anything, just doing R&D and being able to actually do something that was unthinkable before. This is very new when you think about it. We can start so many new ideas like that. In the research world, in the science world, this kind of revolution has not yet happened. And so we need to be able to provide new ways for people to take initiatives, to start things, to prototype fast, ideas, and not because it's nowadays it's very hard because we're in cycles that are multi-years, and so it's very slow. But we're changing that.
Can I just quickly say something to add there before you ask? I know you're keen to move on to questions, but there are 2 points that must not get lost. One that obviously I'm not going to repeat because Thomas has talked about it. So when you have these big mega trends that we are talking about, be they to do with technology, that means we are more connected and we're able to sort of, get in touch with each other more quickly and so on. In fact, there's the death of distance that is happening here. All that stuff is against the backdrop of where mindsets have to change, mindsets about how you do things. And that's the reason why previously the way people were trained, they were not exactly trained to understand that you can jump, from one direction to another in a fluid manner. But now increasingly, because we have all these tools that are coming up and all these opportunities that are coming up, then we have a very big task of also changing mindsets for people to understand that those possibilities are there and to create opportunities, or ways for them to be able to grab those opportunities because they'll just pass them by. And then another very quick point, and I think this is very important that Yao was underlining. He kept saying it's not that, apps are not useful, but it's very important to understand that innovation is a very, very wide spectrum. And if you just focus on one technology, and you think that, well, I have access to coding and this and that, and I can get access to big data, so we all have to do that, you're doing yourself a disservice. And I can take the point that obviously it's also about the direction of change. So if you're talking about technological trajectories, there needs a little bit of shaping, because if people only have access to the possibility to code and the possibility to access data, then you'll find quite a huge activity there of everybody running around, making apps and doing all sorts of things. But that doesn't mean that you don't need surgical instruments that, are sort of, better than the one in the past, or that you need, lateral devices that are more sensitive and more effective and more cost, accessible and so on and so forth. But what you then do is bias the talent that you have to focus on, what, was calling low-hanging fruits, because you're really coming to the edge of where you can actually make a big difference and moving away from the sort of upstream stuff where you can actually step changes. So, and I think that is very important for people to understand that, not to get trapped at the end of the spectrum when they scope to do much more upstream.
Well, thank you very much. I think that your various submissions have actually addressed a lot of the issues we are looking at. We've seen the importance of having a research-driven innovation landscape, the importance of having an interdisciplinary focus, the importance of partnerships and thinking across sectors and focusing on the mega trends and not just trying to see where you can, write the next line of code and think that, okay, we are addressing healthcare. And we are also having lots of comments and questions from our participants, but we've run out of time. We've exhausted the time that we've set for the program. Somebody has shared about the health innovation in virtual environments that's being run in Ghana. So we are collecting all the comments and questions, and then we'll write this up and then share it so that everybody can follow what has been said. So my last and final question to all our panelists, if you can quickly, starting with Yao, is simply that what kinds of opportunities exist for young innovators from your initiative? I know you've mentioned it already, but just so that we are fully alert.
Okay, so I'll start off with WAGBIP. WAGBIP aims to be a training center. So we are a training center. The last 6 to 7 years, we've trained well over 300 people at the master's PhD level in molecular biology, immunology. So if you're a young person listening and you're interested in that kind of level of graduate work, look us up. We actually have a graduate intern program for people just out of their first degree who are looking to get some research experience. So that's another opportunity. It's quite highly subscribed. So, I think it's quite a popular program. And then at Yamachi, well, we are just starting out. We're a very young startup, but we aim to be a place where we can attract, we already have, we've hired a full stack developer, so we are hiring people who write code. So, we will build apps too. But we are looking, across the spectrum. We're hoping to have an internship program where we can bring in young, talented scientists to come and see what life doing research in a private company is like versus what's in academia. So stay tuned for those announcements as we grow and as we have opportunities. But certainly, we're looking to really harness the talent that is here. And our plan is not just to be in Ghana. We have a really Pan-African vision. But yes, those opportunities will hopefully be coming available not in a not too distant future. So thank you very much for listening. And I hope this has been useful.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
So at the moment we have a call on innovation. So it's the AFOX Health Innovation Platform. We have a call that is open until the 3rd of March. It's been open since the beginning of February. Maybe some of you might already have seen it. And if not, I'm in the process of posting the link here on the chat so that you can access it and you can read more information about it there. And just to point out, we're not interested in just digital technologies, it's everything. So from vaccines, and actually we have applications that are talking about making vaccines coming out of Africa and all sorts of other things, therapeutics and so on and so forth. So we want the whole range. And also to bear in mind that there are areas that are not usually given very much attention, but they matter quite a lot. And I think somebody mentioned something to do with reagents. So there's the medical laboratories related testing and diagnostic capacity. So if someone is innovating something around that, we are very much interested. And also areas that are not generally considered as fashionable, but they really matter in the African context. And in this case, I'm thinking very much about novel solutions relating to maternal and neonatal care that improve mortality and morbidity outcomes in Africa. So please have a look at our call, and if it's of interest to you, please submit before the deadline, which is 31st of March, and just before the stroke of midnight BST. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, Thomas.
Well, I think the best way JOGL can support what you do is by inviting you all to develop a profile on the JOGL platform. It's an open source and free space where you can meet other people who are interested in science innovation like you, and if you have an idea for a project, you can bring it here. The only particularity is that everything that happens within the JOGL space is open source, and collaboratory. So the goal is really to create scientific and technological commons, so that everyone can share the benefits of those research. Thinking like Wikipedia, if you want, and so we have currently several opportunities, and one is still open for any projects working around COVID-19, and you have the opportunity to get funded, to be supported by the JOGL community. It's direct towards as much prevention, diagnostics and treatments of COVID-19, and also basic understanding. And we'd be very, very happy to host you there. Otherwise, the platform is agnostic in terms of thematics, so we'll have more and more projects touching climate change and or for example, agricultural trends. So if you want to be able to develop your project with an open community of contributors, well, you're welcome to JOGL, and we'll be very, very happy to help you understand how to navigate if it's very new to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Thomas. Do we have any other questions from our participants? You can raise your hand, maybe. Okay, so in the absence of that, then I'd like to say a big thank you to everybody for joining the chat. We are recording a video, which means that we'll make it available to you afterwards. We'll write up the conversation and the discussion so you can have access to the notes. And looks like there are lots of issues, chats, comments that we have here. We intend to maintain this series as a kind of knowledge exchange and thought leadership platform. So we can raise some of the topics in subsequent discussions, or at least re-share it with everybody so that it will inform our work. I would like to also say special thank you to our panelists, Yao Bediako from Yamachi Biotech and the West African Center for Cell Biology of Infectious Pathogens, Dr. Watu Amai from the Africa Oxford Initiative, and Thomas Landren from Just One Giant Lab. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.